All right, here we go. Powered by GoGo Sports in partnership with TSN. It is episode 65 of season 4 of the Dregs Hockey Podcast, presented by our title sponsor, Canadian Club Whiskey. And man, lots to look forward to, Ray, as we're more or less through 2 rounds of the Stanley Cup playoffs, but there's a big one that needs to be played, and that's Seattle, Dallas, and that's Game 7 in the West to decide who moves on to play the Vegas Golden Knights. So you've had a few days at home to recharge again and get your life in order, and a few more days, right, before you dive into what? Are you starting in the West when the Western Conference Final's been established?
We haven't got the final word yet. So I think so, but really that's changed like 4 or 5 times in the last 2 weeks. I will tell you, so I don't know. I'm going somewhere later this week. I will tell you my greatest enjoyment of, and you got to look at this in the big picture, of the Leafs and the Oilers losing.
Okay.
Is at TSN, we have this fabulous director, Franklin, and this unreal producer, Chris. They work together. They've worked together for years. Franklin loves the Oilers. Chris is from Alberta and loves the Oilers. So Franklin loves the Leafs, rather.
Yeah.
Chris loves the Oilers. Our group text today, these two guys are kicking each other in the shins as hard as they can. And this is one of those ones just from like row 23, I get to lob something in the middle of it and have them fight some more. I'm really enjoying how
So what was your lob? What was the best lob that kind of got them going again as things were settling down?
Franklin had pretty much disassociated himself from the chat.
Okay.
Once the Leafs lost. He just went poof, he was gone.
Yeah, I'm out.
And so that gave Chris 3 solid days of just giving it to Franklin. Well, Franklin came in and he's a dark, witty soul. And so I just mentioned that I cheer for both of their teams and I'm really upset for both of them and how much I support them both. And so then all of a sudden, they can't quite turn it on me yet.
No.
But they will. It'll turn that way. But in the meantime, watching these two guys is just...
It's outstanding.
Because I really thought, Dregs, that a team from Canada was going to win this year. I thought the road was clean for one of them to get through, given the way that it had all turned out. And as it turns out, here we are, 93 again. So that's 30 years. And, it's pretty hard to believe, actually.
Well, it'll be a busy week, too, right? As the media avails, begin. They started this morning as we record episode 65 of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Kyle Dubas, the general manager of the Leafs, spoke to the media. Undoubtedly, Edmonton's going to take, a day or two, 48 hours, and, they'll kind of try and decompress and digest, and then they'll meet the media at some point this week. So why don't we look back at both those series, the Oilers and the Vegas Golden Knights, Florida and Toronto, in headlines presented by our friends at Tim Hortons. All right, Ray, so because it's so fresh, let's look back at Game 6 of the Western Conference semifinal, and that is the Oilers, and that is the Vegas Golden Knights. And, let's not take anything away here from Vegas. They won this series and deservedly will move on to play either Seattle or the Dallas Stars. Adin Hill comes into a tough scenario, doesn't he? Replaces Laurent Brossoit, who's out with injury. And you've talked a lot over the course of this season on that carousel of goaltenders that Bruce Cassidy has had to rely on. And then obviously John Marchessault scoring the natural hat trick for the Vegas Golden Knights. And then, as McDavid said, Vegas was clinical in their execution of protecting that lead and keeping the puck away from the Stars in that third period to close the deal.
Well, I mean, they did. They held on and defended about as well as you could in the third. I thought Vegas did a really good job. There were 3 or 4 chances that the Oilers had that Hill made saves on. One was on Bouchard. One was on Ekholm. McDavid hit the crossbar. The ones on Ekholm and Bouchard in particular, though, sometimes it's just your night.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is. Those pucks hit the numbers on the arm of Hill. And so what that tells tells you, as someone that shot
Yeah.
those chances, is you're literally an inch away from that puck, an inch from that puck hitting the side of your arm, the goalie's arm, and going into the net, as opposed to it hit enough of his arm and stayed out.
Yeah.
Hill was awesome, though. What I'm always amazed at the mental game the goalie has to play. He gave up goals on the first 2 shots and then stopped 39 straight.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is, that game could, I mean, maybe if he's different mentally, he gets away from it in the first period and all of a sudden they've given up 4 or 5, which has happened in this series many times. So I was really impressed with that. The Oilers came apart in that second period again. Like the third and fourth goals were breakdowns by the Oilers, like bad ones that Marchessault was able to, or I'm sorry, the second and third goals, my mistake, that Marchessault was able to take advantage of. The ones from in tight, those shouldn't happen given the way the plays unfolded. So I just thought the Oilers would have enough to win.
Mm-hmm.
Ryan Nugent-Hopkins had an amazing season.
And dried up.
Evander Kane didn't have a point in the last 7 games. He didn't look right to me skating-wise.
Yeah, there's a suspected arm injury, something going on there.
But he didn't look like he skated as well to me. Hyman was banged up for sure.
Yeah.
And so, like, every team deals with it. I mean, hell, Vegas is, they've been dealing with it all year. That felt like a series that Edmonton could and should win, and didn't. Clearly, at the end of it, one of the factors was goaltending played a part.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think when the Oilers debrief, they need to look at, depending on what you think of Jack Campbell, but you signed him to 5 years. Here's the deal. GM signs him, gives him to the coach, tells him to do the best job he can with the roster they have. Stu Skinner was clearly on wobbly wheels by the time they got to Game 6. Maybe that was the time to start Campbell.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something you can't unchange. They went into it, and that's the way it is. But that's something to look at again. The other thing is, I know everything becomes about McDavid and Draisaitl. It's not a basketball team. They lost faith in the bottom of their roster. They didn't play those guys very much, and forwards do not function at 24 and 25 minutes well. So they just lose to a team. I think Eichel played 17 and a half minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Like you've got to be able to stretch out your roster a little bit, and the Oilers just can't. Don't.
Let's jump into that a little bit more. Look, I think we're both big fans of Bruce Cassidy. We know how good a coach he is, right? And I'm not going to go out and say that Cassidy flat out coached Jay Woodcroft. I mean, to some degree, I guess that's reality, and it's also obvious. But it did feel, to your ice time point, that Woodcroft was uber focused on the matchup game early on in the first period. I mean, McDavid played 5 minutes, 21 seconds, right, in the first period. And then things started to go awry. That second period gets ugly for Edmonton, and now you're chasing the game. And you're trying to get your horses running and all of those things. So what does that boil down to? Is it exactly as you described, just you don't trust your bottom 6 to be able to deliver, even though the bottom 6 did deliver for the Oilers offensively early on?
Because the game gets short, and I'll use the word panic, but it's not. It's just immediacy and urgency. Like, let's face it, if Leon Draisaitl and Klim Kostin have the same shot, Kostin needs it 10 times, Draisaitl needs it 2 to score.
Right. Yeah.
Those are just made up numbers. But the point being, you trust, of course, the top end of your roster far more. It's interesting is because we'll get to Florida in a minute, but there was a lot of people that thought Paul Maurice didn't know how to coach anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a quote at the end of the series with the Leafs. I thought it was a terrific view, is that not to change how you coach in the playoffs so much from the way that you do in the regular season.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's some subtle changes, of course. You're a little more hyper focused because it's the same team all the time. But if you get to a point where the Oilers had all this production from their bottom six in the regular season, and even through the first round, and then you don't use them anymore, you're compacting the minutes so greatly on so very few. And this is ridiculous to say. Draisaitl got a little quiet in the last couple of games of the series. Yeah. It's ridiculous to say because what did he have? 13 goals or whatever. Yeah. It was an amazing playoff run. But if it's concentrated on just a couple of guys and one of them happens to hit a dry patch, which is inevitably going to happen, then what?
Yeah.
And so
he looked off, by the way, in Game 6, and I mean it's again obvious when you look at the event summary and you see that he's -4, against Eichel.
Well, two of those goals went right through him.
Yeah,
and that doesn't generally happen.
No, it doesn't.
And now you're down to the shortest of strokes, and here you are. You've got a goalie that's wobbly.
Yeah.
The Vegas is throwing multiple players at McDavid and Draisaitl. They're fresher than they possibly could be.
Agreed.
Like one guy, for example, I thought had just an awesome series and was terrific towards the end was William Karlsson.
Really good. Yeah.
And he does it kind of, he had that one year when they came over in the expansion and he, I don't know, whatever, he had 40 whatever goals and he had 6 the year before, but he's a two-way, quiet, effective player.
Mm-hmm.
And, so I think the other point I'll leave with Vegas is I know there's a faction of people that look at play drivers and smaller players and good skaters, and I get all that. Look at Vegas's defense. You can have all of that if you want, and then you get into these 6 trees that are around the front of the net and the way they defend. Even when you think you've got Nick Hague beat, and he turns around and poke checks you from across the street.
Yeah,
like that. There's something to it. Unless you've got, a smaller magician. I want 6 really long, tall guys on the blue line. Like, right. I'll take Quinn Hughes every day. I'll take Cale Makar every day. Pick another smaller point producer, Adam Fox. Yeah. Fine. When I say smaller, 6 feet.
Yeah.
But the rest of them, boy, stretch them out as much as you can. If they can move, they fill up the zone, and McDavid and Draisaitl dominate the play, and then there's nowhere to go.
Yeah. All right. So just to wrap up the West for a moment here, the Oilers and the Vegas Golden Knights. If you're Kenny Holland, do you see the need for change? Are you just hoping that your goaltending is going to solidify? Because there's not much you can do with Jack Campbell at this stage, and you hope that Stu Skinner, who's 24, is going to continue to develop.
Well, Skinner's under contract for 3 years. Campbell's got 4 years.
Yeah.
Oilers, here's your goalies. And you have to hope that Campbell finds a steadier game than he had this past year, because it wasn't anywhere near good enough.
No.
But there will be change. Even if you win, there's change. But that roster...
Yeah, with free agency and things like that, right?
That roster has to evolve somewhat to the point where they can rely on more players. And it's not easy, because the players that you're looking to add, some other team might have a little more cap room and be able to pay them more than you can. And as a result, you don't get those players. But Dylan Holloway is gonna be around that team.
Yeah.
Lavoie is going to be around that team pushing for a job. Like they're going to have to get younger, and some of those younger guys maybe can push for 10 minutes a night, because that 10 minutes is valuable, because it means McDavid and Draisaitl don't have to play 24.
Agreed. All right. Again, Game 7 of the Western Conference Final is Seattle and Dallas, who we'll revisit. Or you want a quick thought on that series? Quick thought.
Jake Ottinger, 23-2-2 after a loss since the beginning of last year.
So you smell a good game coming in goal for the Dallas Stars.
How does that happen? Like, how does that, so I'll tell you, I was entertained to hell the other day with Seattle, and that building was just shaking.
It was like vibrating, that
So
building.
now they got to go back to Dallas, and Dallas
Yeah.
has got a little bit of decisions to make on the blue line for tonight, and we'll see. I mean, it'll be exciting for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll set up each conference final later in the week on the podcast. As I mentioned earlier, the Toronto Maple Leafs had their player media availabilities earlier today. It sounds like Kyle Dubas and Sheldon Keefe are going to speak later. So unfortunately, that'll be beyond our podcast reporting. But if there's anything noteworthy, we can revisit that also later in the week. Takeaway loss from Florida, or to Florida for many, Ray, is that the core of the Maple Leafs now finally needs to be changed. Does it? Or do you feel like there's still a little bit of runway left individually where each player maybe needs to go through this hard lesson of self-awareness and a better understanding of what it takes to win? Or should that have happened by now? And it's crystal clear that if it's Kyle Dubas as general manager, then it's time to look at Marner. It's time to look at Willie. It's time to look at somebody else.
I don't think it should have happened by now. Like I thought they would play better in this playoff, and I don't question that. That these four, the four Tavares as well are involved still. Yeah. Like they haven't been changed or moved. It seems really obvious to me what the real issue becomes is that there's a balance between what you think those four guys can do and the types of players they keep trying to bring in year after year after year after year.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same guys. They're just in different bodies. It's grit, veteran, grind, more physical. It's the same thing every year because they don't feel they have enough of that clearly in the top end of their roster. So they're looking for this balance that's so elusive for them. I keep reading a lot about Ovechkin and Crosby. I think Crosby, what year was he when they finally won? Like it was 6 or 7, was it not?
Yeah, I mean, up there for sure. Yes.
And Ovechkin was, of course, longer.
Yeah.
So if you want to use that model, which one of Tavares, I'm going to take out of the core four because of his contract and age. He's not going anywhere.
No.
But which one out of Matthews, Marner, and Nylander has the same personality, leadership type persona as Crosby and Ovechkin? Which one would that be? And the answer is none of them.
No, not really.
And they're just different people. They're just different in the way that they approach things, the way that they play. And so people like to use these comparisons. I don't like them. I don't like them because they're different people involved in different scenarios in different spots, different situations. Right. I do think they need change. I don't think you make change for like you read some even media or columnists or what have you about they need to blow it all up. They need to. It's so much easier said than done.
Oh, no kidding.
You can say, I want to trade this guy. Somebody else wants him, has to want him.
Yeah.
And then if you're trading a player making $10 million, you have to take money back. Yeah. They don't have room to just drop that guy into the lineup. Here, as it's been well reported, here's the order. Is Dubas coming back?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's got to be decided in the next couple of weeks. If it's not already decided, you keep reading by the draft. No, by
imminently,
like now. So that's number one. Number two is Matthews extension coming up. Yeah. Because if he's not going to give you by the draft the yes, I'll sign, or we're signing and coming up with an extension, then you have to really look at what you're going to do. Because if you get past July 1st, he's running it most likely to free agency.
Right.
And are you really going to do that? Oh boy,
Yeah.
that would be.
Well, look, the sense is with Matthews, maybe it's the arrogance of not Austin per se, but the situation that he's in, where there will be no negotiation. They're going to put the Matthews camp is going to put a term and a number on the table July 1st at what is it? 13 and a half, 14 and a half per year on whatever term. And Toronto, you take it or you leave it. And if you choose to leave it and hope that there is a negotiation, then the scenario unfolds that you've just described, right? So are you willing to do that if you're the Toronto Maple Leafs?
Well, at some point, it doesn't matter whether you're willing to do it or not.
It's a fair point. You got to get led into whatever direction it's going.
So I don't know why, but I have in my head, this is ridiculous, but I'm going to say it anyway. I have in my head 14 times 8.
Wow.
And I think that's probably high, but for the people saying he's going to give a hometown discount or should or that, I would always, in most cases, say, well, I guess always, most cases, two different things. I would, in most cases, say a hometown discount's not the way to go for the player.
Right.
You get what you get, and then they've got to work around it. Don't forget, the cap will go up in a year.
Yeah.
So there'll be a little more runway. But that's point 2 is you need that direction. Point 3 is once you get that, is the coach coming back,
right,
or not? That's another choice. They've had 4 cracks at it. Is that? Yeah. I think there are times when they all look unraveled, including Sheldon.
Yeah, very emotional dude.
Yeah, and so I think it all plays into each other. Like, to me, I can see why some people think you should bring it all back because it doesn't feel that far away. Yet, did that not feel like when Nick Cousins scored the other night? Did that not feel like, oh yeah, well, of course this was the way it was going to end?
It did, yeah.
And it must. I think they found a goalie. Like that. I'm telling you, Joe. I think Joe Wall's really good. He reminded me a lot of Akira Schmid.
Yeah,
in the
very
Devils
athletic, right? Yeah,
but calm and big, presents big. What if next year they can go with Samsonov if they can get him signed at a decent number, and Joe Wall,
and then just figure out what you have to do with Matt Murray.
Yeah, you're gonna have to attach an asset, and chew up some money, and
just
that's the way it's gonna have to go. But I don't know. They're never in the market to be an okay team.
No.
And so that becomes really complicated and multi-layered. I will say one thing that was pretty clear. Adding 6 or 7 players at the deadline was a mistake. If you look back over the last 6 or 7 years, Stanley Cups, the most players the Stanley Cup winners added is 3. And that was last year with Colorado. It was Manson, Cogliano, and Lehkonen.
Yeah. And so you're saying it's a mistake because of the assets that were...
No, I'm saying it's a mistake because you cannot... That means you've built a really great season until March with one team, and now you're trying to reinvent your team for the last 6 weeks of the season.
Right, yeah.
There's too much change. There's too much... they all sound like they really got along. They really sounded like they all had, the idea on the same page, but it's too much change.
So does Austin Matthews, I don't have this illusion that Connor McDavid is banging on the door of Kenny Holland and saying, you need to do this. You need to get this player. You need to, right. Does he have an opinion? Yeah. And I'm sure he shared that opinion in Edmonton. No doubt about that. Does Matthews have the clout because of his contract situation to say to the general manager, I don't want you to change a core. If you're thinking about trading Mitch Marner or William Nylander, I need to know about this because that's going to influence or impact my decision as to whether or not I want to sign here long term.
He does, because leverage is everything.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the other part to this whole contract thing. Doesn't Marner's no trade kick in July 1st?
July 1, no move. Yeah.
So they are locked into no leverage,
Mm-hmm.
the Leafs. Like this cannot be overlooked. Like the Bruins are going to have decisions to make because they got to wait and find out whether Krejci or Bergeron are going to play.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're not going to play, then their position is going to change because of those decisions. The Leafs have already locked into their decisions by the contractual status of the top end of their roster.
Right.
So they're going to have to decide in really short order before those no trades kick in, before Matthews walks into the last year of his contract, before Nylander walks into the last year of his contract.
Yeah.
They're going to have to decide. This was all supposed to be advanced further than it is right now by the time these contracts kicked in. By the time this July 1st comes around,
yeah,
they were supposed to be further on down the road. They're not, and that makes these decisions even more enormous. But the first decision is who's making the decision.
Yeah, yeah.
And that, Dregs, that cannot be understated. Like
I'm with
you. It is fast but they've already had to have had in upper management decisions about, or not decisions, major discussions about what the path looks like, because they're not starting from scratch here.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
And for people that say, oh, it was all on whether they got through the second round or not.
Now,
I don't buy that for a second.
Well, I look, I know that's not the view of Shanahan. You know, his view going into the playoffs, and certainly after round one, was that you do have to analyze and assess the body of the work. And that applies to both Kyle Dubas and Sheldon Keefe. And I don't think that much would have changed because they lost in a 5-game series to the Florida Panthers. So, all right, well, we'll continue to match up, Florida and Carolina, because that's going to be a fascinating series, as a Eastern Conference final.
Let me just throw this stuff out really quick.
Okay.
I start doing a little bit of, it is Florida, not like, it could be Florida.
Yeah.
It is Florida. And then you've got Carolina, and there might seem like there's not much interaction between the two teams, but there's so much of it. It's crazy the amount of overlap between Carolina and Florida, and we're going to see it right through this next series, right? So when I look at these guys, you go, of course, start right there, the Stahl brothers at the first, right? Got a couple on Florida, one on Carolina. Paul Maurice coached the Canes, right? He coached all three of the Canes coaches. Gustav Forsling's turned into a terrific player. He got claimed off waivers from Carolina to Florida. Eto Luosterainen, he's a really good player. If you haven't watched Florida much, watch that kid. He's really good.
Really good. Yeah.
And he went from Florida to Carolina in the Vinny Trocheck trade. Like, these guys are all over each other's footprint. It's a really cool series. And I don't know. We'll find out Thursday, but I'm leaning to Carolina for me. But we'll make that
seem to be a well-oiled machine, though, despite the fact that they're missing parts.
Big parts.
But Brendan Moore has them dialed in.
Yeah,
all right,
sure
we'll get into all of that in episode 66 of the Ray and Dregs podcast. That's headlines. Thank you to Tim Hortons